great pleasure for me to introduce Steve Collison, who is a project officer at Ecos Archaeology, an organisation which took over the work of Northern Archaeological Associates Limited, and he's here to tell us about the archaeological discoveries on the site of a new medieval hospital at Berwick upon Tweed. And I'm very pleased to also say that on Zoom we have Professor Sir Alan Craft attending, who is a long-standing member of the Society, and also on the board of the Northumbria Health Care Trust, which owns Berwick Infirmary. And also on Zoom, we welcome Marion Dixon, who is in charge of this project for the Trust. They both followed the excavations with interest. Steve.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful venue. First time I've been here, and it really is a nice place to deliver this talk today. And if you're listening in Zoom, I would fully recommend turning up in person, because it really is a nice place. So my name is Stephen Collison. I'm a project officer for Ecos Archaeology. I've been in commercial field archaeology for around 18 years. Started out as an excavator on site, before working my way up to project officer. So the purpose of this talk really is to give you guys an idea about the sort of wealth of archaeological potential that can be gleaned from the excavations at Berwick Infirmary. The project was started by Northumbria Healthcare, who are the client in this case. Northern Archaeological Associates, as we were back then, were the archaeological subcontractor, and Thompson's of Prudhoe were the main contractor in charge of the demolition. It is worth pointing out that this was done under commercial considerations. So obviously we had timescales, we had targets to work with, and that influenced the methodology we took to achieve the results we did. So just to give you guys a little bit of a sort of grounding, last time I delivered this talk, I was actually in Berwick, so I didn't need to introduce where Berwick was to everybody. But obviously Berwick sits on the north bank of the River Tweed, just south of the English-Scottish border, as is today. So it's a rather nice image of Berwick, I think. In the foreground, you've got the town surrounded by the bastion, the Elizabethan bastions. And then on the red outline, to the north of the image, or to the top of the image, is the outline of the hospital site. As you can see, it does occupy, a fairly significant part of the land of the older part of the town. But again, just gives you a bit of an idea. Also, on the left-hand side of the image, you've got the River Tweed itself, and then you've got the sea to the bottom of the image. So this just gives you another little bit of an overview. So you can see that the Berwick itself is surrounded by multiple defences throughout its lifespan. To start off with, though, Berwick itself is believed to have Anglo-Saxon origins, largely based on place name evidence. The actual historic core of the town, where that Anglo-Saxon settlement was, remains unknown. We don't actually know where that historic core is. It's likely that it's on the close to the river, around here. There we go. So this Anglo-Saxon settlement, control of it passed to Scotland in the year 1018. And by the historic records indicate that by 1018, it was already a thriving town. So this was a known asset. The reasons why this is so important and a thriving town is because you've got excellent transport links. You've got obviously access to the coast, so you can export goods far and wide. You've got excellent river access on the Tweed, So again, it's easy to get goods to and from Berwick itself, and the surrounding countryside is great for wool production, which is a significant part of its economic income. So it was made a royal borough of Scotland, somewhere between 1124 and 1129. Again, to solidify the importance of Berwick to the wider economy. There weren't many Scottish boroughs designated around that time. As I said, you already had good transport links for trade with the continent, great marine resources, which is something we'll touch on again, and yeah, good wool supplies. Berwick has always been a place of conflict between 1296, when Edward took control of the town from the Scots on behalf of the English, and 1558, 1482, the town changed hands 13 times. So conflict is kind of baked into the DNA of Berwick, really. One of the questions that we wanted to answer is, did the political control changing hands influence the archaeology in any way? And I think that question is still open, but it's as we progress through the project and the post-excavation of the project, that's kind of part of what we're trying to find out. There we go. So this is an interesting little diagram. It's adapted from the Berwick Extensive Urban Survey, which, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Berwick itself, this is a great resource to look into. You can see in green the suspected 12th century streets, and you can see obviously the red outline of our site location. The blue outline around the outside on the top left of the image, that is the castle that began construction in around 1296, and the walls that circle the medieval settlements. Again, they began construction in 1296. Obviously, that is a very simplified image. There were multiple phases, and they certainly weren't built overnight, but it does give you an idea of the layout of the town. So I'll skip ahead slightly. Most of our findings relate from the 12th to the 15th century. And as you notice that the walls in blue don't go until around 1296. So for the archaeology we've encountered for a good part of it was actually the unenclosed settlement. It's easy today looking at Berwick. You've got the large defensive bastions, you've got the medieval walls and medieval defences, and they really influence what we think about Berwick. But when the archaeology we found starts out with the settlement being unenclosed, which is a different way of seeing Berwick. Part of what we see as well is that when Berwick gets enclosed in around 1296 onwards, the nature of the archaeology on the site does indeed change, which it's nice to see. Skip ahead slightly. So this is a diagram of the proposed defences, Elizabethan defences, circa 1558. You can see the bastions around here. And what this illustrates is that this green line here, this road, was originally the main north-south route in and out of Berwick. However, when these medieval defences were constructed, they wanted to change the direction and flow of the traffic going towards the castle down here. So because of that, this area here, instead of adjacent to a main north-south thoroughfare, became economically sort of less important. There's less activity on the site, and again, that's something we'll see. And the other thing to note on this drawing is that when the bastion defences went in the Elizabethan period, we've created a bit of a no man's land. Okay, so this whole area, sandwiched between the outer medieval defences and the bastion defences, it creates an area that wasn't used very much. So because of that, the archaeology beneath it is incredibly well preserved. So if we look at this image here, you can just about see the outline of the medieval defences. And again, the bastion defences. You can see where our site is, which is around here, is not in use. So because of that, the archaeology has survived very well. Underneath, obviously within the town, should I say, obviously you have all the medieval development, or the post-medieval development, and all the modern development. So the archaeological resource there is either on the buildings that are themselves important and archaeology in their own right, but there's very little opportunity to look archaeologically at anything in the historic core. So this site represents an interesting and fairly unique in Berwick way of looking into medieval Berwick, because the archaeology survived so well. This is a aerial photo of Berwick. I just quite like it. That's why I put it in there, to be honest with you. It just shows even by the 1920s, even though we have development elsewhere in the area, sandwiched by the no man's land, so you can see that the bastion is here and the line of the medieval defences is out here. Even despite the fact you've got buildings built up here, the plot where the hospital now resides is still relatively untouched. Here it's been divided into allotment plots. So again, another reason why the archaeology survives so well. So how do we get involved in the project? 2015, there was a desk-based assessment and evaluation. The evaluation was very limited in scope. There was a handful of 1 metre test pits that we excavated, and it was hard to identify the level of resource present, largely because of the working requirements of the hospital. Obviously, it's a live hospital, and it's more important than digging a few holes, so it was hard to understand. That planning application was then went to the wayside until a new one in 2021 was put in place, where we came back in. The hospital at the time was in less use in the bit we were investigating, and we managed to dig 8 evaluation trenches. We found surfaces, walls. We found we found a lot of intense activity. So it was decided by the archaeology section of Northumberland County Council, ourselves as the archaeological subcontractor, and the client, that the only way to mitigate for the construction of the project was to go for a full archaeological excavation. This is important because obviously in commercial archaeology we try deliberately not to dig anything unless we have to, because it is in the interest of the client to not have to fund work that is not necessary, but it is also in the interest of the archaeology to stay in the ground for future generations. So I'll give you a little bit of background on the hospital. So you can see here, the site was divided into sort of 2 halves. This half in the north, we have is the area of our excavation, and this part in the south were hospital buildings that are still being used. The footprint of the new hospital that's going to fill this northern half is near enough fills that entire space. So there's really no way to design the hospital around the archaeology. This is the evaluation we started at. So those little blue and red dots are the 2015 test pit evaluations. As you can see, quite an unsatisfactory way to try and gauge the significance of the site. So we came in and we excavated these trenches that I mentioned earlier. And we decided upon a kind of zone excavation technique, primarily just to fit in around the demolition of existing buildings. Obviously, that came with its difficulties, because as we had to work around demolition of buildings, the movement of rubble, the disconnection of live services. So it all added up. But obviously, with working together, we were able to move forward. So the thing you really want to know is, what do we find? It is a tricky question with a long answer. We found a lot. So to sum it up, you've got the outskirts of a medieval settlement. There's no structural evidence beyond a few things that I'll get to in a minute. So there's no dwellings. And it focuses on the period of time between the 12th and 15th century, and after the 15th century, it largely goes fallow, and the archaeological evidence dies down. So we found evidence of industry, including a huge amount of evidence for fishing, possible grain malting, though I'm hoping to pick the brains of some of your members here tonight, and horn processing as well. We also found a number of wells. There were 7 wells altogether, 2 post-medieval wells and 5 medieval wells. There's a member of the staff here this evening who's in the audience who excavated one of the wells, or several of the wells, in fact, and he can tell you from personal experience that the water table in this part of Berwick was extremely high. So it's a great place to put 5 wells. The other interesting thing we found is a road or a thoroughfare that we did not expect to be there, leading from the main Berwick to Edinburgh Road and possibly to the castle. Again, I welcome feedback on that one. We also found a significant defensive wall and ditch, as well as a huge amount of finds amongst everyday objects. We also found some unique objects as well. So, what were they actually doing on this site? So this feature here, we believe, I'll emphasize that word believe, to be the base of a malting kiln. So you can see here, there's an elongated flue. This is circa 2 meters long, cutting through an earlier feature. We have the flue here lined with stones. Obviously, it's been lost in that corner. The interesting thing is that there's very little evidence for in situ burning. So whatever was, wherever the actual firing chamber was some distance away from where the heat was being taken. If we go to this slide here, you can see on the left-hand side, that's a plan of the feature you've just seen on the photograph, capped with flat stones. So the idea is there that obviously the air's free flowing around that flue, heating the stones above it, and on the right is a plan of the actual of the chamber itself. If anyone has any ideas as to why that might not be a molten kiln, please let me know. My email address is on the end of the presentation. But obviously, malting is an important process for the production of beer. It's to draw out sugars in grains and for beer production. So clearly, they are. So small family groups or small groups will gather together and produce their own small beer. You found a huge amount of evidence for fish processing. So we had, I believe, over 14 kilos of shells and 245 kilograms of bone. Some pits were entirely, almost entirely filled with fish bone, especially. So it was mostly Atlantic cod, but also fresh and saltwater mollusks were present in number as well, and oysters were indeed very common. The 2 quotes you can see on the screen there from the Northeast Regional Research Framework, which we'll sort of come back to, circle back to later on, indicate that obviously this is like a bit of a knowledge gap going into the future. So we have the ability with the archaeological resource we found here to answer those sorts of questions. Really, it is how did the fishing industry develop during the medieval period from its roots in the early medieval period. Obviously, as we define a chronology with the results we've got, we'll be able to kind of answer those research questions. There we go. Just a little slide there. Horn processing. So the pit in front that you can see in the foreground has over 30 cores, horn cores in one pit. So evidently uses a place of horn processing. So talking about pits. So this is a rectified aerial image of the zone 2, the eastern portion of the site. So if you can imagine, to orientate yourselves, this is the eastern portion of the site. We have up and down here where the pointers are going. We have the main sort of north-south thoroughfare. Currently it is low greens, but we believe that in the 12th century it was the main north-south route north-south route in Berwick. There's a huge amount of pits in this area. So we have a north-south route here, and then we also discovered an east-to-west trackway, which we'll get onto here. And then at the intersection of those two routeways, we have a huge amount of waste deposition in the form of recut pits. So obviously it's very difficult to excavate those, because if you want to do it by signal context, it would take you literally years. So it was decided that we would approach it with a series of slots or sondages through the individual features to try and get a stratigraphic link between each feature with each other feature, so you have a complete stratigraphic matrix of that area. Obviously, each individual feature doesn't get a 100% record, but what it does is you sample over 50% of those features, and you gain a stratigraphic understanding of it as well. And by sampling the 50% of it, you gain obviously the defined information from it, and you have the stratigraphic information from it, and that was the approach we used. So the pits themselves, dug in a variety of shapes and sizes, largely domestic waste pits. So we weren't seeing anything particularly industrial in this group of pits here. This was largely just dumping waste on the side of the road. It was full of the typical domestic medieval pottery, ranging anywhere from the 12th to 15th century, as well as a huge amount of animal bone and sort of general domestic detritus. So just to give you a sort of sample of some of the pits. So obviously they range in size. Some were very deep with very vertical edges. Some were sort of very shallow. Again, they're all filled with the same sort of material. This one on the right was quite nice. This was actually found during the evaluation, and during the evaluation we half sectioned this pit and found in it a complete pot, Scottish white gritty ware for those interested. And it always makes me laugh, because if we'd have sectioned it the other way, we wouldn't have found it. It has still been under there. Yeah, so lots of pits. So in addition to all the pits, we actually found an extra well since this slide was being produced, because we went back to do some additional work. So when it says 6 wells discovered and excavated, increase that to 7, please. So 5 of which span the medieval period, anywhere between the 11th and 16th century. The 6th and 7th are Victorian, one of which belongs to the adjacent Poor Law institution on Brucegate. The deepest of these wells are about 2.6 meters. So you do not need to dig particularly deep to hit the water table. These are massively difficult to excavate. Most of these were excavated in winter. And obviously the water table is still very high, and they act like wells. So we have required essentially constant pumping, and obviously a way to try and excavate them safely. So on the left-hand side there, that is Daniel excavating one of the first wells we discovered. You can see that it's particularly nicely dressed stone for a well, certainly. It's a fair amount of effort has gone into its actual construction. the top part of it is robbed out. So initially we thought this was just another pit, but when we got down to that ring of stones, we knew we were onto something a little bit different. So to excavate this safely in this day and age, we have to excavate a large machine-made trench around it. This is obviously to prevent the risk of material collapsing on the excavators. I certainly remember being asked to go down some holes that I would never send people down these days. So I'm glad things have moved on slightly. So this one in particular was actually the earliest one we discovered. It was actually under a later road. We're estimating anywhere between the 11th and 12th century, although obviously the pottery still has to be looked at to confirm that chronology, but it's certainly one of the early ones on site. To compare that to this one, which is probably in anywhere between 14th to 15th century, this is actually produced by river cobbles. Constructed with river cobbles, and it's a lot more ad hoc. We've got another example of how messy it is to actually excavate these features. And you do find a few interesting things in wells. This is another one of our excavators here called Ben. And in one of his wells, he actually found an entire horse skeleton dumped down the well, including horseshoes and all. So at some point, as the well's been out of use, someone has discarded an entire horse and deposited them in the well. So in my head, that's more effort than just, I don't know, it just seems a bit odd to me, but there you go. This is a Victorian example. So this is the one related to the Poor Law Institution, and they were mechanically cut sandstone. Pretty much the same shape and size of the lintels used in the Poor Law Institution adjacent to the site. Again, we had to excavate like a large machine sondage around either side to safely get into that area. Found a couple of particularly nice turned Victorian bowls in that well, which is quite nice. There we go. The next more significant discovery, I guess, is an east-west aligned trackway. So again, if you can cast your mind back to that original overview, that original plan, we've got our north-south road running up here, and then over here, just off screen, we've got the actual castle itself. So again, it's early days in the actual assessment and analysis of this site, but it appears to be as early on you've got a series of plots coming off the main north-south road with economic activity in them. When the castle is constructed after 1296, there seems to be an increase in traffic running across the site. So this trackway gets formally defined. It's constantly recut. So originally it's defined by this inner ditch here, before then being defined by these segmented linears on either side as well. You can also, from that image as well, give you a good insight into the damage that the hospital foundations did. Everywhere you've got these straight intervention lines here is where the hospital has largely robbed away the archaeology. But it also shows you how much did survive. So they're those pits that I was talking about earlier, and here's our trackway coming across. So it was simply an earthen trackway defined by ditches, with plots coming off either side. It later got resurfaced in stone. Though it wasn't a single event, it's very ad hoc. I mean, anyone walking through that area now, after we'd stripped it, can attest it gets very muddy, but you don't have the time and effort to stone the whole thing on one, so you come along and stone the unique areas that you want to. So this is our trackway looking to the east. You can see how you've got a lot of activity either side of it, but the trackway itself remains relatively undisturbed. And you got a clue there as to what these sort of roadside or trackside ditches end up looking like. So it does get resurfaced later on, as I was saying, presumably due to an increase in traffic heading from the north-south road to the castle. And we have this is an example here of the sort of nature of the stone on the road. You can see it's not particularly defined on either side. We've got our excavators here lining up either side, sorry, on one side, defining that northern edge. So it's quite significantly wide. So from there all the way over to here is around 12 meters wide. Again, it wavers in and out, but it's still a significant investment of time and energy. There we go. So it's a very large feature. We used multiple techniques to record it. So we used rectified photography, largely based on drones, and that's obviously the images that we've got here. And that stops us having to plan each individual stone. We can simply use the drone to rectify certain areas, and then afterwards pick out the details that we particularly need. We also did a lot of hand planning, believe it or not, because when you've got a lot of complicated archaeology with a lot going on, sometimes it's just quicker to hand plan, which is a bit of an education for our newer members of staff. But we had plenty of experienced hands on staff to lend a hand. We also used GPS as well for simple things as well. But I must admit, I'm probably slightly old-fashioned, a little bit of a stickler for tradition, so I did like my hand planning. Just to sort of define really what we're talking about here. So we've got our trackway coming across, which is all well and good. And then one day, one of our supervisors was machine watching, stripping some material off site, and he found a large wall. I want to say a large wall. It was around 3 meters wide at its base. It's constructed of limestone blocks, each of them sort of approximately 0.7 meters or 700 millimeters. To go along with this wall was a large defensive ditch. The ditch itself was around 12 meters, and it survived to a depth of 2.4 meters, although originally it would have been much bigger. So this ditch actually respects the trackway, the stoned phase of the trackway. So this was rather unexpected. There's no written evidence of this wall and ditch being part of the defences of Berwick. There's no previous archaeological evidence that indicate that this will be here. So it's quite an important discovery for Berwick. As much as anything else, because it gave us a chance to actually look in detail about the construction of these, because obviously the walls around Berwick at the minute are scheduled, so no one wants to go digging them up just to have a look. So it's nice to actually get into the nitty gritty of how these medieval defences were constructed. The interesting thing, and there's a better slide later on to illustrate it, is the alignment of these. So this is an aerial photograph of our site. I've got the hospital in the foreground here, and you can see here the modern intrusions. Okay, these are the modern, the concrete intrusions that we had to work around, that were the foundations of the old hospital. Our wall is in the foreground here. Okay, so it's there, and it runs off to this feature in the background, is at the corner of the medieval defensive. That standing structure there is a later Tudor reworking that's plonked on top of the medieval defences, but our wall points straight to the corner of the medieval defences. It's incredibly hard to see from this image, but our ditch is there. I would say, for a feature that's 12 meters wide and 2.5 meters deep, it is one of the most horrifically difficult things to photograph. Because if you look close at it, as you'll see in a minute, you see nothing but hospital foundations. And if you're zoomed out, you really can't see it. So you'll just have to take my word for it that it's there. So this is our wall, again, with excavators flanking it either side. And then we've got our slightly better defined wall there. So that's 3 meters from that point there to that point there. It was a significant undertaking. In the foreground of this image here, you'll actually see that part of the hospital had a service duct running underneath one of the main corridors. And during the excavation of this area here, we actually found that they tried to remove part of this wall here, which is that cut there, and then given up. So this wall here is actually tied into the medieval wall there. So instead of trying to take it out, they just simply reused it as a foundation for the hospital, because it was so sturdy and so solid. It only survived one course, which is unfortunate, but it was still nice to see. Again, this is the massively difficult to photograph ditch. You'll have to use your imagination on this one, but this is a machine sondage. So you've got the edge of the ditch coming down here, base of the ditch there, our modern hospital foundation there, and then coming back up there. We have another picture of half of the ditch coming around there. So the interesting thing about this ditch is actually fairly it filled fairly rapidly. It didn't appear to be open for a long time. So we have some initial slumping on the side. We have some waste build up here, but it didn't build up with a huge amount of waste, and nothing to the same level and extent of the domestic waste we were seeing further east in all those pits. And then relatively quickly, it was actually sealed by a clay deposit. So someone deliberately decided to fill it in. One of the really interesting things about the deposition sequence of this ditch is it has a line of mortar in one side. Again, it's hard to see from where a wall is dismantled. So this ditch was open when the wall was dismantled, and then mortar from that process is ending up in the ditch itself. So it's really nice to be able to tie those two features together. This is an example of the ditch section. As you can see, it's very hard to dig a section when you've got modern services, you've got concrete foundations, some quite high concrete foundations over the top. So it's where we can actually pick and choose our section. This is the actual terminus of it here. Believe me or not, it comes round there. But yes, imagination required. So where does our ditch and wall go? So anything in a dashed line, take with a pinch of salt. But if you want to extrapolate, then you can do. So it's on an odd angle. So you've got our castle over here that had a moat around it. The main access to the castle is over this bridge here. Where is our trackway going to? So we have our road, which is a continuation of low greens there, coming up there. So where is our trackway going to? Is it to take traffic from this road straight to the castle? Is it simply to hook up with Castlegate, which is here? So this is Castlegate. It's now the main sort of high street of Berwick. And if you accept that, then where does the ditch and wall come in? So we have our ditch. If you extrapolate out, again, it goes to the corner of the medieval defences. So we do, in subsequent work that's not actually on this presentation, we do actually have evidence that where the cursor is now, that the ditch can re-establish itself on the other side and carries on to the south. Well, that's a very strange shaped area to enclose. Obviously, the wall and ditch, they have to be defensive in nature, given their size, but what are they defending? Are they a second line of defense in case the eastern flank falls? So again, if you imagine you've got a river all the way around here, but the eastern flank of Berwick is actually quite exposed, and there's been a couple of attempts to fix that throughout the Berwick's history. And the sort of leading theory at the minute is that this wall and ditch system here were to create a secondary enclosure that separates the castle from the town in case this flank fell. So if they pierced this eastern flank, or an enemy force pierced the eastern flank, you'd be able to get straight to the castle itself and both the town, whereas this wall and ditch could potentially separate the castle from the town. Again, answer on the postcard, please. So what did we find in terms of finds environmental evidence? So we have found over 18,000 pottery sherds, which is quite a large number. 245 kilograms of animal bone, including bird and fish, 14 kilograms of shell, huge, quite a large amount of waterlogged leather, including 10 shoes. We took over 7,420 kilograms of soil samples in order to recover the valuable environmental evidence. And obviously, it's worth pointing out that all of that material has to be individually assessed for its archaeological potential, and then ultimately analysed and reported on. So, just to give you a little bit of an example. So this is some of our medieval pottery that we found. This is kind of what it looked like when it's coming out of the ground. But you can see there's some really nice unbraided sherds. This is out of one of those early wells that you saw. We found quite a few of these decorated jug handles faces. I think around 12 in the end, I think it was. And this is our pot I alluded to earlier. So again, it was in the evaluation phase. This is Andy, who discovered it, nearly cut it in half with a shovel. Luckily, he didn't. What we're going to do with it, ideally, is do some scientific process called lipid analysis, which will hopefully tell us what the pot contained, or what the pot was likely to contain. So it's quite a broad. So that the pottery spot dating that we got back from our early activity was quite a broad range. It's somewhere between the 12th and 15th century, which is not that useful. You know, if you're talking about a dynamic environment that's changing, that's changing hands in terms of political leadership and developing as a settlement, we need obviously to try and pin that down. But because we've got over 18,000 sherds of pottery, then we think that is an assemblage that we're going to be able to pull out a chronology, a more sort of accurate chronology, especially because we've got all that stratigraphic evidence as well. We did find a small amount of early medieval pottery, but again, it's probably residual. There's probably nothing happening on the site that you define as early medieval, but there were some potentially earlier sherds, although we need to confirm that in the process we're going through now. So there's a large block of text, so read it at your leisure, but basically the ceramics is obviously an incredibly important tool for us as archaeologists, and that's obviously highlighted by the North East Regional Research Framework. I will note quickly, it is the original version of the North East Regional Research Framework, not the recent released version. So basically, what it's saying is that you've got to try and tie in urban assemblages with other types of settlement as well, and you've also got to tie in with the sort of wider area and different regions. So Scotland, obviously, it was a massive influence on the development of Berwick, more so, or probably equal to England. So how does that look archaeologically? How do you tie in the Scottish influence and English influence? Well, we're hoping we're going to be able to do that with our with the pottery that we have from the site. So a few some of the animal bone we found here. So this is a nice one of our nice horse skeletons. So its skull was unfortunately removed before the photograph could be taken. It was actually in that intervention there. But again, someone just dumping a horse in a pit on the side of a road. There you go. One of the other things we found was this potential barrel-lined latrine. So you can see it was actually dug in an earlier pit. So this is Charlotte, one of our excavators. We excavated this down, and it's incredibly humic, organic fill. We actually found this barrel in here, and in that barrel, yes, it was particularly smelly, as you can imagine, balanced on some stones here, and we believe it is a barrel-lined latrine, which again gives you an idea of something else they were doing on site. We also found a few sort of unique finds. So we had this jeton, minted in Tournai in the what is now Belgium, or was part of the Kingdom of France, minted somewhere around 1521. So it shows that Berwick is not isolated, simply sort of somewhere to get lost between England and Scotland. Berwick was a kind of important part on the international trade network. Another one of the particularly nice objects we have here. This is a scaled hanged knife. The base here is in the style of horseshoe, again, its design is influenced by continental cutlery makers, and this is fairly common in London in the sort of 1500s as well. So part of what we're trying to do now with this archive and this amount of material is to try and eke out what its significance is and eke out its potential. Obviously, being part of the coast, it has a huge amount of importance for informing what medieval fishing industry looked like. It could potentially link regional typologies, especially between Scotland and Northern England. And we also have the possibility of using some scientific techniques to refine the chronology of the early pottery. So we have a few candidates for thermoluminescence dating, which would tie us some nice specific dates to our pottery assemblage. We're also going to undertake a program of C14 dating as well. Obviously, with C14 dating, the period is quite vague in the actual curve of your results in medieval periods, quite imprecise. But because of our stratigraphic understanding of the site, we're going to use Bayesian analysis to try and pin down that chronology, and that'll link back into the understanding of the ceramics as well. We can also add new information to our understanding of the defences of Berwick itself. I mean, Berwick itself is really kind of defined by its defences, and so being able to understand how those defences changed and formed over the period from the 12th to 15th century is really adding a huge amount of new information. Again, these are some questions picked out the newer North East Regional Research Framework, and this is kind of the kind of research question we're attempting to answer. So I'll come back to that in a minute. So I just want to tell you where we are now. So at the minute, we are undergoing post-excavation assessment. So this started when we came off site in July of 2022. So that involves going through the archive, tidying it up, producing stratigraphic site matrices, and getting all the assemblages out to the relevant specialist to see what research questions we can ask of this material. So this assessment is going to be submitted in June of this year, and based on that, that's really a roadmap as to what research questions we're going to answer and how we're going to answer them. And then after that period, we go through a post-excavation analysis. So, which is essentially a full analysis of the archive material with those research questions in mind. And then ultimately, we will go into publication and archiving in 2024, 2025. It's likely to be published as a monograph, freely available PDF. And the archive hopefully will be deposited at the local museum in Berwick. So that's where we are. So this talk really was just to give you a kind of overview of the project, a kind of potential of the archaeological knowledge that could be gleaned from it. Just nip back to this slide really quickly. So there are questions there that I think our site can directly answer to. you know, what can archaeology tell us about the emergence of the fishing industry in the northeast of England? Well, quite a bit in our case. You know, how can we better understand castles beyond viewing them as defensive sites? Well, again, you know, the importance of that trackway and like road going to and from the castle, you know, is some new information that can be fed into these types of questions. So there we go. So thank you for listening. Sorry if it's a bit waffly, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'll leave you with that image of a part of our site, and that's basically what that bit of the site looked like every morning. We'd pump it out every morning. Bless them, the excavators would get in there, dig as hard as they could, and then by the time they got back there the next morning, it'd be full up again. So this is not an easy process. It takes a huge amount of work, both in terms of the organization, in terms of the clients, in terms of principal contractors, in terms of archaeological subcontractors, but also in terms of just people physically going out there in horrible conditions, getting absolutely soaked wet through to achieve the kind of the results that we're aiming for. So I'd like to, on a personal note, thank everyone who excavated on the site, and thank everyone who contributed to making the site a potentially interesting and valuable part of the archaeological resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Will you be happy to take some questions?
Absolutely, no problem at all.
So,
just a couple of questions. Firstly, I'm not here when the infirmary that is being demolished, that was built. And
yeah.
secondly, presumably the reason that you didn't have any evidence of dwelling is that they were being wooden and burnt down quickly and basically lost.
So, to answer your first question, the hospital started construction in 1876 in the southern part of the site, and then the concrete foundations that you saw were largely from the 1950s. So again, it was still relatively untouched. See, we really didn't find any timber evidence of timber structures. So there were very few post holes. The post holes we found were part of fence lines, largely defining plots either adjacent to that trackway, perpendicular trackway or adjacent to the trackway. So we didn't find a lot of evidence for dwellings in that part itself. I think, if I'm honest, I think we were just slightly too far out of town. I think for it closer to town, you would have started to see that physical evidence for occupation. Yes.
Why were those 50s foundations added?
It was so when you dig a trench to pour some concrete in, you dig a trench, put the concrete in, the concrete expands to fill the trench. If you then rip it out, all of the archaeology to one side comes with it. So it was actually easier to dig around the foundations, and that would, in some cases, that actually gave you walkways to actually safely walk around. In some cases, it was too tall. But yeah, they were just too intrusive. Basically, you would have damaged a lot of archaeology following that.
So the possibility that your 3-metre wall represents a change of mind about where the eastern defence is going to go, and that initially they were going to miss out quite a big chunk of the town. I'm just thinking of all the huge changes of mind that went on as the medieval walls of Newcastle were built, and quite significant chunks of the town were going to be omitted, and eventually they changed the circuit and included them. But it wouldn't surprise me if archaeologically we've got the equivalent of those features along earlier projected lines with the circuit in Newcastle, i.e., colossal amounts of wasted effort because people just couldn't agree on where to put them. Clearly, the date of demolition and the infilling of the ditch would be
exactly. Yeah.
Are you very precise about that?
It's something that we're going to have some really good dates from it, because we have features. So, for example, the well where the horse skeleton came out of was cut by the ditch. So we've got some great environmental evidence from that well. So hopefully they'll get some good carbon dates from it as well, radiocarbon dates from that as well. And then obviously we've got some great features that post-date the backfilling the ditch. So I'm really hoping we are going to be able to really bring that date in and give us a good chronology for that sequence. But I think you're absolutely right. It looked relatively short-lived from the infilling sequence. It looked relatively short-lived, and so it could have been something
for a change of mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
The other thing that comes to mind is that actually, if it really was as depopulated as you suggest, there wasn't a community able to lobby to include it. So it might have been to that extent. People's economic interests were being harmed because their sort of kilns and things were going to be excluded, but not a huge population actually already resident on the spot to kind of create a class.
Yeah, I absolutely, it's definitely something to consider. 100%.
Questions would be answered.
Anybody else?
Just to follow up on what Derek is saying, are you certain it's a medieval wall or is it a important wall, because it's very closely related to Henry VIII's mountain?
That is the thing.
The angled so that the artillery in Lord's Mount can enfilade that whole side.
The main evidence that it's medieval is its stratigraphic placement under I didn't mention actually in the talk, but there's a layer of soil horizon that was deposited on the site after the castle was built. So we're pretty sure about its chronology at this minute. Obviously, assessment still in progress, but that was actually sealing the wall. And the pottery evidence we found so far from that medieval soil horizon is suggested it's largely medieval, and that is sealing those events basically. So, but yeah, it's certainly something again during the assessment we'll really pin down. But that's the kind of where we are at the minute.
I two things really. I wonder if the mystery wall is not town wall, but a very, very extensive outer wall with castle, Barnet Castle or something like that.
Yeah.
You've got that very, very extensive outer wall, because it doesn't look as though it could enclose a significant bit of town.
No, you're right.
And partly related to that, I wonder if the explanation for not having dwellings on your site is in the slide that you left on the screen. It's never been a bit of Berwick that you would really want to build your house in.
I think you're possibly right there, yes.
It's therefore turned over to predominantly industrial use. Yeah. And the wells are not dwelling related wells, but industrial related.
Yeah, I think that's right. So to your first point, I live in Richmond, and the sort of Richmond town, historic core of the town, is enclosed by an outer Bailey wall. This and it's considered quite large. Whereas this, if it was an outer Bailey, would be like double the size of Richmond's. But it is certainly possible. And as to your second point, yeah, absolutely. The earthen trackway phase early on, it's constantly being with small drainage ditches being dug either side, constant modifications, or it's flooded there, right? We need to dig another trench here to pour the water away. So I think you're probably right. Absolutely.
The segmental shape of Richmond is quite reminiscent of the potential segmental shape of Castle and your wall.
That's why I was.
It's quite a similar sort of arrangement.
Yeah, that's why I was leaning that way, and especially coupled with the chronological evidence of it being beneath this sort of soil horizon that is kind of late medieval. So, yeah, absolutely.
Don't you then have to plan for a major medieval thoroughfare running through it?
Yeah, well, the stoned phase because if you remember the ditch respects the road, so this phase of the track where it's stoned over, the ditch actually respects that. So
No,
yeah,
of
you've
course,
got,
but I mean also the present, forget what its name is, but I mean the present main street.
Castlegate.
Yeah, I mean, is effectively going to cut through that.
So let me, can't remember which slide it was on. Now we can all talk about.
And the other thing to say, just while you're finding it, is those like that tend to be very early. And,
Yes.
you know, by the time you're getting stone perimeter fences,
Mm.
it's not impossible, but it just gets less likely that later the days of construction.
Yeah. Absolutely. So this is sort of obviously in solid green is where we definitely know it is. So our track we're coming over here. We've got our stone surface that's kind of at the intersection of those two features, and this here is Castlegate. So this is kind of where the after the defences here stopped this road being the primary route. This is where the main route became. So at some point, yeah, this trackway here will intersect with Castlegate. But yeah, I mean, to your point, the Vaxa, we have, if we imagine that we've got this ditch here, and we know it continues there because we've seen the end of it. You know, let's say it does something like that. It's a large, you know, bit to include.
I could see that. If you, I think you probably possibly have to curve your projected ditch to respect the right-hand road, the eastern road.
Yeah.
And if you also curve the other end of it, possibly to that sort of angle of the late medieval wall, to the west, you've got something big. But I mean, we don't have a clear chronology for the castle. Is it really starting in 1296?
It's I did this talk in Berwick, and there are several people there who have spent their entire lifetimes studying the chronology of the castle and defences, and they know far more than I. So I've been picking their brains, or will be picking their brains with the analysis process. So finding a chronology of those is incredibly difficult, because we have a great records of the Elizabethan bastions, but the medieval fortifications, they're just referred to almost monolithically as the medieval fortifications. There's not a huge amount of evidence for there's not a lot of written evidence for individual phases of it, and where it is, it's hard to tie it to physical impacts on the ground.
I was just going to say, I believe that the description came out of the first attack on Scottish town was that he left over walls, so this was a walled town he was attacking.
I think, certainly from what I've read, that Edward I began the construction of it, but he didn't hold it for very long. And then the Scottish overran it, but I think a number of a very short time later, and they basically said that the walls are half built, and then they carried on the construction of it.
Was it changing hands so many times? There's room for 13 changes of the plan.
Exactly, yeah.
Soldiery,
Yeah,
with nothing to do with
exactly.
garrison.
Yeah, if you ask 13 builders to do one project, it's going to look a bit wavy, isn't it? Yeah, no, absolutely.
But as a matter of interest, something's a little separate from what we've been hearing. Do you have anyone or other people living in or near there who are engaged with your satisfaction in your work?
In terms of the people living nearby site, we obviously we're very aware as commercial archaeologists that you know, a lot of what we do tends to kind of happen behind closed doors. Whereas this the client here was absolutely fantastic. You know, they enabled us to actually do community outreach work as part of it. So for the first part of the excavation, we actually had, so in this corner here, we actually had a viewing gallery, so where the public could come in and view, and that was open sort of 4 hours a day, sort of 3 days a week, where we had members of staff that were there to talk people through what we're seeing. It is rare, but certainly something myself as a commercial archaeologist, I'm keen to push forward more. Obviously, not every site is going to be suitable for public engagement, but this was fantastic, and I've got to say that the client and the contractor were brilliant in helping us organise that as well. We also had open days on site as well. So yeah, the local, the neighbours were really supportive of the archaeology. In fact, kind of the chap who owns these 2 plots here under this ditch, I had extensive conversations about trying to dig up his garden, but he wouldn't have it. Yeah, I did try.
Not about birds, fish. You mentioned about sea fish and mollusks, what about salmon? Because we have fresh water on.
We did have salmon. Weirdly enough, I've actually just been sent the assessment of the fish report yesterday. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I did skim through it, and yes, there was a lot of salmon present as well. So yeah, absolutely. But certainly the biggest part is the Atlantic. Yeah, the Atlantic.
There's a Zoom question come in from Susan Mills, who says, you said that no medieval dwellings were found, yet there were all those pits containing largely domestic waste. Were people living within the main town and dumping their rubbish outside it?
I think so, because there was no structural evidence of dwellings, but we had a huge amount of waste being deposited. I almost think that you've got traffic moving up and down this north-south road. You move across this trackway. You're accessing the plots. So if you're living in the town that's sort of very, very busy, very everyone's packed together, and you have the opportunity to just simply dump your waste on your way to where you're going to go and to brew some malt and grain, then why wouldn't you? I think you're right.
Any more? No, that's all.
Can I ask another question? Do you have any intention and knowledge of when that might be, of producing a book or some such about your work?
I will be attempting to write it, so I have some knowledge of it, absolutely. So if we go back to this is the sort of stage that we're, bear with me. So this is the kind of what we're doing now. This is the next steps. At the minute we're doing the assessment. What can this archive tell us? What can this material tell us? We're going to produce a plan in terms of an updated project design and a statement of potential. That will inform the full analysis that will take part in the rest of this year and 2024. And then ultimately there'll be a publication made available approximately 2025, be a freely available monograph PDF format, so you can just download and read at your leisure.